Pull up a chair and buckle up. It's the Original Strength BodCast.
Hey guys, today I'm interviewing Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. She's the author of 7.5 Lessons About the Brain and How Emotions Are Made. If you've ever wanted to know how your brain works or how it's wired, you're going to want to listen to this conversation. And really, you're really going to want to read those books. They are amazing. Anyway, thanks for listening and enjoy the show. I don't even know where to start with you. Your books are they're amazing.
Oh, thank you very much.
I've read 7.5 Lessons About the Brain 3 times. I just finished How Emotions Are Made, and I'm probably going to have to read it like 7 or 8 times
Oh,
because
no.
well, there's just so much in there. It's really, really amazing. In 7.5 Lessons About the Brain, and really in How Emotions Are Made, you talk about that the brain is not a triune brain. It's not the classic model we've grown up always hearing, that we actually have one brain. Can you go into just a little bit about that? I mean, I want people to read the book, but like everybody, in all the TV shows, all the movies, all in school, you always hear,
Sure.
even in The Waterboy with Adam Sandler, we're talking about the triune brain. So
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to elaborate. I should point out, this is not my research. This is research that's been around really since the 1960s, 1970s. And the irony is, well, let me back up and say, so if we go all the way back to ancient Greece and we look at how Plato discussed the human psyche, which loosely speaking could be translated as the human mind. It's not an exact translation, but for our purposes, it's good enough. Plato talked about humans having part of their mind dedicated to instincts like feeding, fleeing, fighting, what neuroscientists sometimes humorously call the 4 Fs. That's neuroscience humor. And there's another part of the human mind that's really devoted to emotion, and a third part that's devoted to reason. And Plato depicted these as 2 horses being controlled by a charioteer, right? So the charioteer is reason, rationality, that's controlling our inner beast, is the idea. And neuroscientists in the 20th century really took this idea, which is really a discussion about morality, about human morality, and tattooed it really onto the brain. So when you look at the brains of various animals, vertebrates, animals with backbones, fish, lizards, mammals, that like rodents, primates, and so on. When you look at these brains with the naked eye, they look very different. And it looks as if what's happened over evolutionary time is that the brains of animals have accrued new parts, have grown new parts, so that a lizard brain just has the parts for instinct. And a mammal brain, like in a rodent, say a rat or a mouse, looks like it has new parts, a part called the limbic system, which is limbic meaning border, for the tissue that borders the lizard brain. And in a primate, particularly in humans, we have these very large cerebral cortex, which sits on top of the limbic system. So it looks as if, you have an inner lizard for instincts, a limbic system for emotion, and a cerebral cortex, which sits on top and controls the other 2 for rationality. And this idea, which is called triune brain, for three brains, this idea became very, very popular in the 20th century. And it particularly became enshrined in the public consciousness in a book. It had been discussed before this, but it was really in a book that was published in 1977 called The Dragons of Eden. This is a book by Carl Sagan that won a Pulitzer Prize. And, this became the public's understanding, and actually many scientists' understanding of how a brain evolved and how it functions. The irony is that in the 1960s and the 1970s, scientists in a different field, um, uh, in evolutionary neuroscience and in molecular genetics, really developed the capacity to peer deep into the molecular structure of cells, to examine the genes within, and not just the genes themselves, but also how the genes work to direct the production of proteins, which makes up your whole body, including your brain. And what they discovered by mapping the molecular genetics and tracing the similarities is that actually the brain didn't evolve in parts, and it doesn't actually function that way. So you don't have three brains, you have one brain. And the only animal on this planet who has a lizard brain is a lizard.
That's awesome. So I found that very refreshing. I think because intuitively I've always rejected, right or wrong, the notion that we had a lizard brain, because it just seemed like I was a victim of something that was in me and I couldn't control it. And maybe I still can't control myself very well, but the way you describe the brain, the way the brain is, seems like we're less of a victim than we seem to paint ourselves to be as far as how we are.
Yeah, I think that's part of for me, that's part of what's really interesting about this, is that we all have moments where we feel that we have been hijacked. Like something has hijacked us and caused us to do this thing or want this thing or say this thing or feel this thing that we really, really, really don't want to do. And that's really ill-advised. So we all have that feeling, that intuition that that's what's happening. But if there's one thing that we know about the brain, it's that your experiences and intuitions of what's happening to you do not explain how the brain works. The brain is a master of deception. You know, it creates experiences and guides your actions very, very fluidly, all the time, creating this belief that its products reveal how it works, and it doesn't. So you're feeling that something else is causing you to behave in ill-advised ways is not really what's happening under the hood. And we do have, in a manner of speaking, we do have a lot more control and therefore a lot more responsibility for our actions than we might realize and then we might like. But I think it's also important to understand that when I say control, I don't mean like wrestling your desires in the moment. That what really efficient control looks like is not necessarily all happening in the moment when the control is most needed.
So from both your books, or both of those books, I know you've written more. I wrote down 5 words that really stood out about the brain and the body, and I'll just say these to you, and then if we have time, if we could just touch on each one of them. The first one is body budget, and that's 2 words. The second one is concepts, predictions, affect, and social reality. Those 5 things seem to be like the everything about us, not just our emotions, but about how our world, how we see things, how we paint everything, create everything, who we are.
Yes. So I think you hit the highlights. If I look at this, body budgeting is something that is discussed in the first half lesson in 7.5 lessons. Prediction is lesson 4. Affect is lesson 6. Social reality is lesson 7. I didn't really talk about concepts so much in 7.5 lessons because my goal was to make it a book that was short and sweet, that would maybe attract people to read it who were didn't really necessarily think of themselves as interested in neuroscience, but nonetheless were intrigued. But actually, a close read of essay 7 of lesson 7 will make it clear that I am talking about concepts in that lesson. I just don't use. I was my husband basically arm wrestled me out of the a desire to, talk about 6 C's in lesson 7 instead of 5 C's. So I talk about a number of different phenomena, all beginning with the letter C, and concepts would have been the 6th. And he just was, like, that's too much. You really have to not do that. And I'm like, okay,
Well, I thought concepts was a huge, like it was in the smack in the middle of all of it to me.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And it's really interesting that you pick these, because I'm looking at these and I'm thinking, I just literally finished giving a lecture to alums at Northeastern University, where I work. And these were the big topics in my lecture. I just strung them all together. These are I would say, the high points of maybe what makes my work and the work in my lab really unique, maybe compared to other people's work.
Can you briefly describe what body budget is?
Sure. The technical term for body budgeting is allostasis. That's a mouthful. What it means is, the definition is, the brain is anticipating the needs of the body and attempting to meet those needs before they arise. So think, if your brain is going to stand you up, as it's standing you up, it's raising your blood pressure so that oxygen can make it to your brain. Without that rise in blood pressure, you would faint, which would be very metabolically expensive, meaning you could hurt yourself and you'd have to spend a lot of resources to heal. So most systems are more efficient when they predict what needs to be done next and allow themselves to be corrected, as opposed to just reacting to the conditions in which they function. And the insight here is that when you look at the structure of a human brain, actually you look at the structure of any brain, but any vertebrate brain. I'm not that familiar with invertebrates, so I have to, restrict myself to vertebrate brains. But when you look at any vertebrate brain, but particularly, it's very clear in the human brain, and also when you look at brain evolution, what you see is that the driving force here is the brain's regulation of the body. That your brain's most important job is not thinking, it's not rationality, it's not even the ability to see or hear or smell or the world. It's your brain's most important job is regulating the systems of your body to keep you alive and well, and to do it in the most metabolically efficient way possible. And the way to describe this as a metaphor is body budgeting. That you can think about what your brain is doing is budgeting. It's running a budget for your body. It's not budgeting money. It's budgeting glucose and salt and water and oxygen and all the nutrients that are necessary to keep you alive and well, because you have billions of cells in your body and you have multiple systems in your body, and they have to be coordinated with each other and they have to share nutrients. And so something has to take care of coordinating, managing that internal coordination. And our bodies are too complex and too big to do it, without a brain. So we have a pretty big brain because we have a pretty complicated body that has to be coordinated over time. And so you can think about everything you do, not reduce it to body budgeting, but think about the role of body budgeting in everything that you do, because it's just one factor that helps us understand what, in a given moment, what makes our lives easy or hard. Your brain is running a budget, and every time you move your body, every time you learn something new, you're making an expenditure. Every time you eat, sleep, you are making a deposit. Other people can make metaphorically withdrawals or deposits, meaning they can actually make body budgeting easier or harder for us. So they can make you more efficient, make your brain more efficient. They can also make your brain less efficient because we're social animals and we evolved to contribute to each other's body budgeting. In fact, to lead a healthful life and live a long time, you need other people actually to contribute to your body budgeting, and you contribute to theirs. So this is a way of thinking about many things that we sort of take for granted or just do in everyday life, but it's a way of thinking about them in terms of energy regulation, which is one of the major conditions or major considerations, which will determine how long we live, whether we are sick, get sick or not, and how distressed or comfortable we feel.
What are concepts and how do we use them to predict our reality and or budget our body? And if that's too deep, that's you can.
Yeah, not too deep, but it just takes a little bit of a setup. So the way to think about this is to start with your brain's perspective, not to start with your experience of yourself in the world, but to start with your brain's perspective. Your brain is trapped in a dark, silent box called your skull, and it exists there for your whole life. And it receives a stream of sense data from the world, changes in light, changes in air pressure, changes in the concentration of chemicals. These are the sense data, the information of what's going on in the world. But your brain doesn't have access to what's going on in the world. It only has access to the outcomes. You can only sense the outcomes. So for example, when you hear a loud bang, what was that? What should you do about it? Is it somebody slamming a door? Is it somebody dropping a box? Is it a car backfiring? Is it a gunshot? I mean, what it is important to know because it will determine what you need to do next. But your brain doesn't have access to what the cause is. It only has access to the effects. And the same thing is true for your body. So your brain is running a budget for your body. It's controlling your body, and your body is sending a constant stream of information back to your brain. And so when you feel an ache in your chest, what is it? Is it anxiety? Is it hunger? Is it the beginnings of a heart attack? Your brain has to guess. It doesn't know. So how does your brain make these guesses? How does your brain try to figure out the causes of the sensory changes when all it has access to are the changes themselves? This is what scientists and philosophers call a reverse inference problem. You know the outcome, you don't know the cause. You have to guess at the cause, and there are multiple causes. So how does your brain figure it out? And the answer is your brain is using past experience. It's using memory. You don't have a conscious awareness of remembering, but what your brain is doing all the time is, figuratively speaking, asking itself, well, the last time I was in this situation and these changes happened, what did I do next? What did I hear next? What did I see next? What did I taste next? And so on. What did I feel next? So it's making a similarity. It's basically making a similarity judgment. It's creating, it's remembering, it's assembling a memory, assembling from memory. It's using memory to assemble. Yes, it's using memory to assemble past experiences as a way of predicting what's going to happen next, so that you can keep yourself alive and well. Now, things which are similar to one another in some way are a category of things. That's what a category is, stuff that's similar. And a representation of a category is a concept. So what your brain is doing all the time is using past experience to construct concepts on the fly as a way of predicting what's going to happen next. And these predictions are not abstract things. They literally are the preparation for movement, the preparation for changing, regulating the body, the preparation for moving the body, and what you will ultimately experience, see, hear, taste, smell as a consequence of those movements. So concepts are not these static things that exist in your brain that you can just retrieve like a file from a file drawer. Concepts are, they're representations that your brain makes, and it makes them using the past, using your past experiences, combining them in sometimes novel ways to make predictions about what is going to happen next and what you should do next. So concepts are tools. They're tools for living. They're tools for regulating your body and tools for constructing your experience.
Is language part of concepts?
Yes, not necessarily. It doesn't have to be, but in humans, it usually is in the following way. Let's say that I had pizza for dinner last night. I didn't, but let's say that I did. And let's say I wanted to communicate to you that I had pizza last night. I could list the features of the food that I ate. Well, it was flat, it had made of dough, it had sauce on it, it had some cheese. Okay, I could list the features, and that would allow your brain to construct a concept so that you could understand what I was saying. Or I could just say, hey, Tim, I had pizza for dinner last night. I say the word pizza, and in my brain, I have a set of features that I'm representing. And with a single word, I say that word to you, and your brain starts to conjure a set of features. So it's a very efficient way of communicating concepts to each other, because multiple features, I don't have to list out 10, 15 features. I can just say a single word, and that will conjure in your brain a set of features. Now, let's imagine that, I'm from the East Coast and you're from Chicago. When I say I have pizza, you might be thinking, deep dish pizza. She had a pizza with deep dish. And I might be thinking, remembering that I had a very thin crust pizza. So it's not always the case that there's a perfect match, but usually that can get worked out really efficiently in one or two go arounds. So words are effective ways, very efficient, effective ways of communicating concepts to each other. And sometimes we need a symbol, some way of indicating a collection of things which are serving a particular function. They have a particular functional feature that they don't have by virtue of their physical makeup. So, for example, if we look at all of the things that have served as currency or money in human history, there's a huge collection of things: paper, plastic, diamonds, salt, barley, big rocks in the ocean, mortgages, which is just like a promise of money in the future, Bitcoin, right? Like all these things, they don't have anything physically in common at all, but they have a common function, a function that we have imposed on it. It's a function that exists only by virtue of a bunch of humans agreeing that these little pieces of paper, let's say, have a function. And so when we want to talk about a concept of a category of things that aren't physically similar to each other, but that have a common function, that's really hard to do without words. You don't need words, but they're helpful. So here's an example. I'm not actually wearing a wedding ring today, but I am married and I do have a wedding ring. And when I'm out of the house, I wear my wedding ring. I don't walk around saying to every person I meet, I'm married, 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 as I wave, right? They just see my ring and they know what it means. There's a concept there. She's married. That predicts certain things I will do and certain things I won't do. It makes me more predictable to them because we've imposed a function on a ring. The ring doesn't have that function by virtue of its physical nature. We just all agree that it has that function. And so it does because we agree. It's a very, very tricky concept to get. I mean, maybe I shouldn't call it a concept, but it is a concept. I mean, it's a very tricky idea to get, but it's a crucial idea to get because much of what culture and civilization is made up of concepts that we make up. We impose function, a functional feature on something it wasn't designed to have. And we then agree that it has it, and then it does. So this doesn't always work, right? Like you and I could agree, oh, we're going to walk through walls. That doesn't actually allow us to do walk through walls, right? I mean, there is a limit to what social reality, making up these kinds of concepts can do. And there's so much more to say about that, particularly in this political moment. But, yes. But my point is that that really wouldn't be possible. It wouldn't be possible for us to make up concepts and add to and add functional features to things that become real to us. We wouldn't be able to do that very easily without words or some kind of symbol to indicate what is similar to each other functionally.
No, that's good. So I wrote a book, and it was about, well, I teach about movement. And what I've learned is what I'm really helping people do is improve their body budget and the affect of their body. But I also know that, like, so part of what I was struggling with was that our thoughts, like I think in words often, and I'm limited to the words that I have available to me as to far of how much depth I can go into thought. So we can get stuck in a framework of what we've been taught, depending on what the definition of the words mean. But those also form the concepts in which we think, we act, and our brain predicts.
Well, let me just say though, Tim, I agree with you, but I want to just push back a little bit there. And I want to say words are definitely important. They allow you to make concepts efficiently and easily with very little cost metabolically. But if you wanted to make a concept that you'd never made before, or a concept that's important to you, and you wanted to try to communicate to somebody else without a word, it would just take a lot of effort. Mm-hmm. It's not impossible to do, because I have demonstrations where I have people do it right during my talk. It's not impossible to do. It's just harder.
Right.
So think about listening to sounds of a language that you've never heard before. To you, it sounds just like noise. You're experientially blind because you don't have the concepts to make sense of those sense data. But then eventually you start to like hear where are the breaks in the words. And then eventually, it's a long, hard, arduous process for an adult, but you can do it. It's just a lot of effort. So right. I would agree with you that we all get stuck by the vocabulary that we have, but we can break out of that. It's just, it takes a lot of effort, like exercising takes a lot of effort.
No, I agree, but you kind of really, it was like one of those duh moments. And I think it was in How Emotions Are Made, where you were talking about the different depths that other languages have that the English language doesn't. And you were talking about, but if you want to expand your concepts or build your options, learn a bigger vocabulary, or you can expand your framework that you're working with, or you can learn the meanings of words in other languages and try to get more granularity and more depth to it. And I thought, well, that is a wonderful way not to get stuck in your current framework. And it's something that you can do and take upon yourself to expand your world and how your brain actually predicts things later.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So really quick, you said that if we agree upon a function, you and I agree upon a function, we just created a social reality. or well, you didn't say that, but I think that's how you create social realities.
Correct.
Um, what is well, social realities don't necessarily, like you said, they don't exist until we create them and then we agree upon them.
Right.
And you mentioned that that could be a superpower, and you close your book with superpowers are great if you know that you have them.
Right.
But it sounds like sometimes it can be kryptonite also, depending on the agreements that you make in your social realities.
Well, think of it this way. Imagine Superman didn't know his own strength, right? He'd go to give you a hug and he might crack your bones, or he might shake your hand. And in a pre-COVID era, obviously, right? We don't shake hands anymore.
What is that?
Yeah, I know. But he'd go to shake your hand and he'd crush it, right? So Superman is partly, if you ask my husband, he would say the greatest superhero. I know it's debatable.
Your husband's right. No, your husband's right.
Yeah. So, in our house, that's how it is. But I don't know. I'm voting a little bit for Wonder Woman, but still. You know what? I have a drawing that I helped my daughter make for my husband, her dad. I don't know. She must have been 5 maybe, and she drew a picture of him as Superman. It was just, it's yeah. So we're using the same icons in our respective lives here.
As we should.
We should, right. But I guess the point is, imagine not Superman not knowing his own strength. He could actually do quite a bit of damage to people. Part of his, part of the maturation of his character is him coming to realize, his own strength and his own limits, right? And the same thing is true, I think, for any superpower. In fact, that's the sort of story, the origin story of many superheroes, where they come to learn that first they don't know the limits of their power, or they don't know the extent of their power, and they end up harming people by accident, because they don't know, and then they come to realize it, and then to use it judiciously. And I think so making social reality, making concepts is just something the human brain does. And we do it. Other animals do it too. All animals really make even single cell animals make concepts. They use similarity to from the past to make predictions about what to do next. And that's basically making a concept. So all animals can do it. Humans can do it, making what are called abstract concepts, where the similarities aren't physical. They're not like this, how something looks or how it smells or how it sounds. They're functional similarities. But some of the similarities that instances have, or that objects have, or that people have, are made up by us. They're not even functional features that exist for real in the world. They are completely made up by us. As long as we agree on them, they're present. So if I'm holding a cup in my hand, this cup has a functional feature, which is to hold water. It can hold water. I'm holding a glass in my hand, like a cup. It can hold water by virtue of its physical nature, okay? Because it has a bottom and it has sides and it can hold water. I could use this cup as a vase for flowers. Now I'm imposing a function on it that it didn't otherwise have, but it could have by virtue of its physical nature. You and I don't have to agree on anything. I'm just using it in a different way. But it has a physical nature, and that physical nature can permit many functions, not just the one that it was designed for, which is to hold, this one was to hold water, a water glass. But some similarities, and I should say, so lots of things that are glasses, could be used as vases, and Lots of things that are originally designed as vases could be used as cups to drink out of, and a pot could be used as a vase, and anything basically that has a bottom and sides to it could, if it can hold water, it can be used as a vase. So the similarities there, we're imposing a similarity, but it's a similarity that the object can bear on its own by virtue of its physical nature. But there are some similar features, some features of similarity that only exist because we say so. And that is social reality. And we do this all the time. Most of civilization is built on social reality. That is a group of humans imposing a function on something that that thing does not normally have by virtue of its physical nature. And there, we have to have a way of communicating to one another what the function is. And it's completely made up. Now, it's not boundless, as I was saying before. We could agree that we all can fly and that we're imposing the function of flight on the human body, but that won't mean that we can fly. There are limits to social reality. And if you'll permit me just to say, we could all agree that we don't have to wear masks and that a virus isn't, contagious, but a virus doesn't care what we believe. All it cares, if you could say that a virus cares about anything, you would say it cares that you have a nice wet set of lungs. That's what it cares about. And that's pretty much it. That and a vulnerable immune system. So there are dangers. There are dangers to believing so much in the reality of the things we make up, the concepts we make up, that we mistake social reality for physical reality.
Is that the same thing as, is social reality the same thing as effective realism? Or is it, because that's another concept you brought up in how emotions are made that just seems so, I don't know, interestingly heavy.
Yeah, that's a great phrase. So there should be a word for that. Interestingly heavy.
It's like
right?
chiplessness.
That's right. That actually is a real concept in our house. I will say we do actually use that word. Yeah, affective realism is not necessarily, it's certainly used in making social reality, but it doesn't have to be. They're really separate ideas, I think. Affective realism is the following. So your brain didn't evolve to sense the outside world and react to it. Actually, if you look at the earliest creatures, they had pretty sophisticated movements, but very little sensation at all. They couldn't see, they couldn't hear, they really didn't even know they had an environment pretty much. But what they did have, the hypothesis is that what they did have was an internal coordination system. Because if they were able to move in a sophisticated way, then they had body parts that had to be coordinated. So you have this internal coordination system, a system that's coordinating the internal parts of the body. And when something impinges on the body from the outside world, that disrupts that internal coordination. So the internal coordination is a little bit like getting an external sensor for free. If something disrupts your internal coordination, it's like, oh, something's out there that I need to care about. What is it? I don't know, because I don't have eyes or ears, right? But something's out there that I need to care about. And so the sense data from body budgeting work a little bit like that. Body budgeting requires a certain degree of coordination. So your body's always sending sense data back to your brain. You don't experience those sense data directly. The sensory changes from your heart beating or your lungs expanding or your metabolism working or your immune system working, unless something goes wrong, right? So unless something goes wrong, you don't usually experience it. Even when you run up the stairs, you exercise and you feel your heart beating, you're usually feeling your heart beating against your chest. You're not actually feeling your heart beating on its own. It's usually a somatosensory feeling that your heart's beating against your chest. That's what you're feeling is your heartbeat. So in a sense, let me back up and say, so you don't feel the sense data directly. What you feel is simple feelings, feeling pleasant or unpleasant, feeling comfortable, uncomfortable, feeling worked up or calm. Sometimes people call this mood. Scientists like me call it affect. So in a way, a disruption of the internal coordination. Something is out there in the world that's happening. It impinges itself upon you. It disrupts your internal coordination. You feel it as affect. So when a change in affect happens, it doesn't tell you what's going on. It just tells you something might be going on out there that matters. Now, the tricky bit is that you can have an affective change for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with what's going on in the outside world. If you don't sleep enough, if you don't eat well, if if the barometer changes, I mean, like just many, many, many things. And when I say many things influence your affect, influence that internal coordination, and therefore these simple feelings, I'm not saying that one at a time. There are many things which at the same time influence your affect. It's complex. I don't mean just complex like as in, hard. I mean complicated. I mean it's complex as in a complex system. And so when does an affective change really indicate that something out in the world is happening and you should care about it? When does an affective change indicate that something internally is happening and that you should care about it? When does an affective change indicate that you didn't get enough sleep maybe, or you aren't hydrated enough? Or when does it indicate each of these things? Your brain doesn't know, it has to guess. So affective realism is where you have a change in affect that you feel strongly and you experience that as telling you something about the world, as a property of the world. The example I like to give is when I used to drive to work, when I used to go to work outside my house, I would drive on the highway and someone would cut me off. And, my initial reaction, my response would be, what an asshole. Now, of course, assholeness is not like intrinsic to that person. Maybe that person was like late for work. Maybe that person, maybe their kid was in the hospital. Maybe their mother was sick, who knows, right? But I was having an affective experience that I embedded in my perception of that person. So when we experience a drink as delicious or a painting as beautiful or a person as nice, what we're doing there is we are experiencing affect as a property of something out in the world instead of as our response to something in the world. And that is a very, very, very important distinction.
So I have this, my motto is it feels good to feel good. And reading your books, I realized that, so to me, I was, affect is like internal tone. Mm-hmm. And you had a one sentence, and I think it was in How Emotions Are Made, that no decision is made without affect. Like, so if every decision we make is filtered through affect, and I was like, well, that's powerful.
Well, it has to be true.
Yeah.
But wiring of your brain requires that it's true. Your brain is always regulating your body. Your body is always sending sense data back to your brain. You always experience that as affect. Sometimes affect is in the foreground of your attention. You're paying attention to it. Sometimes it's in the background of your attention, but it's always there. And the parts of the brain that are very important for decision making are also very important for regulating your body. So you just can't escape the idea that rational decision making is somehow the absence of feeling is just a myth. It's a story that humans tell themselves to make themselves feel better, but it's really not true. It's really not true. It can't be true.
Exactly. So to me, the in order to be the best person that we're designed to be, or to serve the greatest good, or just to bring light into the world, we kind of need to feel good. Even I mean, not need to, but the better our affect is, the better decisions we can make, the better, maybe the better judgment we can exercise, maybe even the better predictions we can make about what's going on
That's
around the
very
world.
that's very possible, Tim. But I would also say that sometimes feeling bad doesn't mean that something is wrong,
Oh, I agree.
right? So, um, you know, I have been working with a personal trainer for, I don't know, almost 20 years. And, um, I've learned that when I start to get very close to the edge, where I, that feeling where you're not really gonna throw up, but you might, but you're almost there, but you really, right? The closest that you can get to that edge, you're really working at your sort of lactic acid sort of edge, that is, that's, that's the territory of physical change there. So now, the important thing is I can only do that if I sleep well, maybe if I have a protein drink beforehand, and then I go hydrate. I'm drinking water through the whole thing, and so I'm basically making deposits beforehand, and then I make a major expenditure, which is sort of like an investment in a healthy body and a healthy brain. And I would also say in a decent mood later on, right? I'm making an investment, and then I will replenish what I've spent. But in the moment, sometimes sometimes it's good to feel a bit of yuck. Sometimes it's good. It means you're doing something hard and you're working really hard. You just don't want to continually feel that, because if you continually feel distressed and uncomfortable, that probably means that you're running a deficit in your body budget. And that is a serious thing.
But in those moments that it's good to feel that distress and stuff, you're doing that for a reward though. And knowing the reward and knowing what you're doing actually improves your affect.
Oh, for
And
sure. But I would say you're not really feeling distress, right? You're not really you feel discomfort.
this uncomfortable.
Yeah, but it's not distress. And in fact, that learning to experience the sense data from your body as discomfort and not distress is actually really important to many things, including, not becoming addicted to opioids or kicking dealing with the addiction, um, and a number of other, phenomena that and other things that, are really, really troubling for people.
Dr. Lisa, I want to be really respectful of your time. I could talk to you for hours and hours, but I know you have to go. But thank you so much for sharing your time with us. If you are listening to this, you need to check out 7.5 Lessons About the Brain, at least that. And if you have the time, it is worth the read to check out how emotions are made. It's phenomenal work. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. And thank you so much for spending so much time to, digest and really understand the science. It's really fantastic. And I've just really enjoyed talking with you. So thank you.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a great weekend.